The main objective of this review was to look into the regional interagency coordination mechanisms that respond to mixed population movements in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. And I think that the term mixed movements here is very important because it refers to people traveling together on the same routes, but for different reasons. The review had a specific focus on three major UN-led mechanisms. I think, in summary, this review was designed to produce very concrete, realistic, and feasible, if we can say, recommendations to improve the overall effectiveness and efficiency of the humanitarian response, avoid duplication, and strengthen the best practices in terms of coordination in such a situation like, I can say, major sort of population movements in the region. The review was commissioned out of a necessity of a very quickly changing environment and an increasing complex situation, environment on human mobility in the Latin America and the Caribbean region. So the region has seen as a very unprecedented increase in mixed movements. So the review looked into, it looked at it in a multi-layer and multifunctional way. So looking at different aspects. The review analyzed coordination by level, by leadership type, by function, by interconnection, and relationships with governments. And I'm going to explain a little bit what this means. So the coordination by level. So what we did was examining the mechanisms, the coordination mechanisms, at the regional, sub-regional, and national levels, recognizing that there were coordination challenges and solutions that differed on the different levels. We also analyze coordination by leadership type, meaning that we categorize the mechanisms based on who leads them or who led them at the time, those led by the UN system, those of a political nature led by the states, and those led by civil society. So doing this categorization somehow of the different types of coordination allowed us to look at or analyze different governance models and their effectiveness. Another category that we identified was by function. So we went from just mapping the structures to analyzing the practical implementation of the coordination across key functions. So these functions, we included how mechanisms handle needs assessments, for example, strategic planning, advocacy, fundraising, information management, and monitoring and evaluation of the response. Although there hasn't been something that we identify later on, is that there hadn't been an evaluation as such of until this exercise took place. Another aspect of the coordination that we looked at was interconnection. So we assess the joint efficiency, the complementarity, and the interconnection between the different mechanisms. So we look at each mechanism separately, and then we looked at the interconnection, the existence of the interconnection, and the quality of this interconnection, or the absence of interconnection between the different mechanisms. So, for example, we look at which sectoral working groups were duplicated between the R4B and the Red Flag, and which have been successfully unified. So we looked at those particular mechanisms, and we see whether there were functions that they were duplicating while they were working in the same areas. And the final way that we analyzed coordination was by relationships with governments. So the review also analyzed the relationship between these regional coordinating mechanisms and the national and regional government bodies of the host countries, or the different coordinated mechanisms that few countries would have for a particular region, like South America. I think the data collection tools, we use a mixed method approach on 4 principal data collection tools, and those were the mapping matrix. So more than a list, this was an analytical tool that we developed to systematically extract and compare information across all the coordinating mechanisms that we identified. So we defined variables that included everything from mandate and objectives to funding, accountability mechanisms, information management systems, etc. So that was one. Another one was semi-structured interviews. So we conducted 47 interviews with about over 70 key individuals. And what we made sure, of course, is that the different interviews represented a wide range of stakeholders, including leaders of the coordination mechanisms themselves, representatives from UN agencies, NGOs, and donor organizations. Then the third data collection method that we used was focus groups. So we conducted 7 focus groups that were held with a total of about 100 participants. And we conducted 4 of these focal groups at national level in Colombia, Ecuador, Honduras, and Panama. Important to say that we chose Panama because Panama is the regional hub for Latin America and the Caribbean, where most of the UN agencies, international NGOs, and the core coordination bodies for civil society as well as placed. So Panama was important in that respect also to use it for feedback, as a feedback mechanism. And in fact, the Panama focal group was the last one that we conducted, which we used also to start providing a little bit of feedback of the initial findings, the preliminary findings that we were finding through the interviews and the other focal groups. And then we also conducted other 3 focus groups at regional level, where we brought all different actors as well, the same ones that I mentioned before. And the final data collection tool was an electronic survey. So to maximize the quantitative data collected, we conducted an electronic survey, and we received 266 responses from individuals across UN, international and local NGOs, donors, and governments. And if I can mention, I think it might be important for ALNAP, is that unfortunately, when we designed the methodology, the idea was to first conduct the survey, and then with the findings of the survey, or more to say, the gaps that we found in the survey, then we would focus and utilize the interviews, the semi-structured interviews and the focus groups to dig into particular aspects that we found important. But unfortunately, and important to say, this was a review that was initially planned or conceived to be conducted in 7 months, and the time was reduced to 3 months. So an important aspect of this and a challenge of this exercise was to negotiate the scope of the review. But in the end, we found ourselves as a team that we had to basically overlap the implementation of some of the data collection exercises, and that made that the survey and the focal groups and the interviews were conducted mostly in parallel. So unfortunately, we didn't achieve that idea that I was mentioning before. We always do what we can. Lessons learned in regards of the result of this review in particular. One of them, very important, is that coordination requires dedicated resources. So effective coordination cannot be just an unfunded mandate. This study, this review, we had the possibility to interview a number of people involved in the cash and voucher assistance group, and they had a dedicated coordination resource. But at some point when they lost the funding, they had to rely on voluntary members to do the work of coordination. And they said we saw enormously the difference. The moment we didn't have funding for coordination, it became much of a challenge. So I think the lack of a specific funding for coordination is a major challenge for sustainability in general. Another conclusion another lesson learned that we found is that integration is possible but requires effort. So there was, for example, in Colombia, what they call the back-to-back system, which works to harmonize the efforts of the humanitarian country team and the R4B platform for coordination. So this example shows that it's possible to integrate different coordination structures to reduce duplication, but it really requires very clear agreements and an ongoing effort to monitor that integration is possible. Another, I think, very important lesson learned is that the local actors have to be supported. Very often we see that local organizations, as critical as they are for sustainable response, and we are seeing that even more so in the current phase of enormously decreasing funding for humanitarian operations in general, they are overstretched local actors. So we really saw that in talking about coordination, it's important not to overload local organizations and small organizations, because often coordination requires an enormous amount of meetings and reporting and etc., that particularly small organizations with limited staff and even often working on relying on volunteers, they don't have the capacity to respond to that. And at the same time, they are responsible for implementing their own activities, which in the end is very much of a priority as well. And maybe a final lesson learned also from the implementation of a review or an evaluation of this extent is that this review was conducted by a team of 9 persons, 9 researchers, who were based either because being original of the country or being based in Ecuador, Colombia, Spain, France, and Australia. And it was a tremendously rich exercise working together in this team, but it required an enormous amount of flexibility from the side of everyone being based in such different time zones. So I think it's a call to us as evaluators and humanitarian workers that always that flexibility and adaptability to the needs of all those involved in evaluation exercises, but also within the teams is very important, is crucial.